Teddy? Oh, you ready? Oh, it's very bright, the sun, isn't it? Okay, are you ready to start? Okay, that's it. Hello and welcome to Pet Talk with me, Anna, and Teddy. And we welcome back our wonderful guest today, who is Toni Shelbourne. Hello, Toni.
Hi.
Well, we are a double act in many respects. So I wanted to talk to you about this magical book that you have written called Among the Wolves. And I think, yeah, the only word I have for it is really magical, because it is about a time in your life in which you were working with wolves. How did that come to be?
Well, it's one of those, again, like magical moments of, I mean, lots of people know I'm a Tellington T-Touch instructor. I was sat at home one day just doing a bit of admin on my computer and the phone rang, and it was a wolf handler from the UK Wolf Conservation Trust. And Jerry was like, I've sort of done a little bit of this T-Touch thing on the walls and I think they like it, but I'd really like to see what happens if someone who knows what they're doing came and showed us. I was like, so I very nonchalantly went, oh yes, of course I can do that. Thinking in my head like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So I went out one very kind of cold March morning or afternoon, I can't remember which, and I was allowed to kind of approach the fence, and all these wolves kind of came up and they were sniffing my hand, and I was allowed to give them a little scratch through the bars. And I thought that was enough. I mean, I couldn't speak. I was like so overwhelmed. And then they went, oh, should we get one out and you can do some T-Touch? And of course, again, I was like, oh yeah, that would be great. Thinking, oh my goodness. So I go into this yard. It's breeding season, so the boys have been put into a different pen, and there's 5 girls, and they're all like clambering to get through this gate onto this hard standing that led into some kennels. They tried to get one out, but all of them sort of burst through. So I'm now like surrounded by all these wolves, and I'm doing all the things I would do with a dog that I thought might be a bit anxious about me. So I was turning my back and trying to make myself small. They're like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do this. And I managed to kind of slide out into the next run while they sorted it out. And then they had Dakota on the yard. And I went in and I did some T-Touch on her, and she seemed to really enjoy it. And she went back into the enclosure. And I was just like awestruck. And then I found out that you could volunteer and you could become a wolf handler. And I left 10 years later.
Well, of course you did. I mean, wow, that's just extraordinary. What do you feel you learned from them?
Oh my goodness. My whole concept of dogs, of canines, of observing body language, of being respectful to animals, of working in a trustful way, building a relationship. I mean, I could go on forever. They taught me so much. And I kept looking at these walls and going, I've been told for years that you do this, and not that I really believed any of this anyway, but you do this because that's how wolves do it. You know, you have to be the alpha, you have to go through doors first, you have to blah. And I looked and went, they don't do that. They don't do any of that. Yeah, I was like, it's completely a myth. Where my first book came from, which was dispelling the myth of dog training. And it was just like, oh my goodness, my whole world was, I mean, I'd already been working with dogs for years, but my whole attitude, my whole way I work, being able to observe like micro little expressions, because with wolves, you get a millisecond to stop doing what they don't want you to do before they go, enough's enough, I don't want that. Whereas a dog, days, weeks, months, sometimes years, sometimes they say, that's not acceptable, please don't do that to me anymore. So I really honed my observation skills, but also just this having this incredible relationship with these animals that didn't have to have a relationship with me. They are their own beings, really intelligent, and although they were socialized, so socialized, not domesticated, basically just meaning they are happy to be around people, I still had to play by their rules. You know, you still have to go, oh, okay, so if I do that, they're not going to like that. Or if they do this, they'll like, you know, so you really have to kind of step into their world, really, and be very respectful. And I took all of that to the dog world.
That's both beautiful and powerful, and there's so much in what you said there. But I want to ask you about how the fact that they are socialized would differ in terms of their own interactions with each other and wolves that are actually in the wild. So is there much difference in the way they structure their, let's call it, societies, um, given the difference between them?
Well, the problem with captive wolves is that there's never a chance to disperse. So you will get more infighting because in the wild, it's mum, dad, and the kids. And when the kids are grown up, like humans, they leave home. And that doesn't happen in a captive society. And that's where all of the, you know, the Rudolph Sheldrake stuff came from, you know, and the coining of the phrases of alpha and beta and omega and all of that. So when you have a pack of captive wolves, you have to kind of manage that quite carefully. So we had very small family groups. As they grow older, we may have to have split, you know, we may have had them all together to begin with, but over the years, you'll get takeovers of leadership, you know, of because they are still looking to be the pair that breed. So you'll get that conflict there. So we were really lucky that we had amazing amount of space. We had 3 very big enclosures and another smaller enclosure. So we were able to like add on more enclosures as we needed to kind of just manage those family groups. And you don't get that in the wild. You know, you do get some conflict sometimes, but generally it's overbreeding rights, and generally it's sorted out by, you know, either somebody leaving or somebody dying, or, you know, and in the wild, you know, you can go from being a breeding pair to being the lowest member of the pack. So in wolf world, you'll find that scientists now and biologists who work with wolves don't use the words alpha and all of that. They do still use the term omega, because there is always one that is the really the, you know, the sorter out of conflict. So the omega's job there is to kind of like be the clown, to like lessen conflict between the group, insert themselves in between wolves that are warring. But that wolf has the right to then become a breeder, or a breeder you know, may then end up as an omega. So it's a very fluid, you know, people always think of it, you know, it's very linear, you know, and it stays like that. It doesn't stay like that at all. We had wolves that flipped completely, you know. But yeah, very small groups that we had. And a lot of times when you have wolves in places like safari parks, you end up having to move wolves around the country because of this conflict that goes on.
There's, again, what you're saying is just so important, because firstly, what we are seeing is that the artificial surroundings are what causes conflict, because then there's competition for the more competition there is for resources, the more conflict you're going to get, which actually is exactly the same with us human beings. That's it. And the other thing I was thinking about is, the parents who have more than one child in a small flat, and the children are fighting, etc. And it's a very similar situation, isn't it? And the competition that goes, to get mom and dad's attention. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because we project so much onto our interpretation of animal behavior. So to look at wolves and say, oh, there's the alpha, is really to misunderstand them, and to see things from how we would behave, or some human beings would behave.
Yeah.
So that's really important when you're dispelling that myth, to see where it's coming from, because I find it fascinating that we have this alpha omega interpretation when actually that's not what they're saying at all. You have one who's actually very valuable because they're the peacemaker, the peacekeeper, the diplomat,
Yeah.
but they're
Yeah.
not valued.
And that's not to say that there isn't a structure. There isn't, there is, but people put too much, the word of things like alpha has been just, ruined, but we've ruined it because we then think of it means you have to be strong and powerful and violent, and it's not. We always used to talk about bullying alphas at the Wolf Trust, because that's the one term you can use those terms in wolf world now, is if you've got a captive pack. In the wild, you only use that if you've got two breeding females. You might have an alpha female and a beta female. They might be mother and daughter, and they've stayed in the same pack because there's loads of space, like in Yellowstone, loads of food, and they've both had a litter and they bring them up together. But it's a really interesting thing because we've just corrupted that word. That word now doesn't mean what it should mean. And actually, with the original research with the expression of wolves, which was the first paper that came out that coined these expressions, it was done in breeding season in a zoo with 20 adult wolves in a tiny enclosure. So of course there is conflict, but of course we didn't have the means to be able to watch wolves in the wild then, because we didn't have tracking devices, we didn't really have the helicopters, we didn't have those resources that we have now. And so much has been learned since, for example, the wolves have moved into Yellowstone, for example, how the impact they have, the positive impact they have on the environment, and how they structure themselves, and how, it's very rare to have a massive pack. If you do, it usually splits. You'll have splitting and budding and things like this, and youngsters will move off and create their own territories. And it's just like us, kids move out. They don't stay with their parents. And if they do, there may be an aunt or an uncle, there may be a granddad or a grandmother who's still there and being looked after by the rest of the pack. So yeah, it's so similar to us. Social creatures who have a family and do everything to coach those young wolves to go and survive in the world.
Is there any, do they keep ties once the pack splits? So when the youngsters move out, do they kind of, still interact in a friendly fashion with each other? Do they remember who they are?
So youngsters are around kind of 9 months or a bit later. And usually when the next set of cubs came along, and maybe the food's a little bit rarer because the cubs have priority, sometimes they'll go off for the summer, but then they'll come back for the winter because it's easier to hunt in a bigger pack because it's harder in the winter. And of course, some wolves will bud off and they'll find a partner and they'll have a territory right next to their parents. There's also now evidence, and we never knew this until a number of years ago, of like often what we would call a teenage male who might leave the pack and he'll wander and go and join lots of other packs. There was one wolf in Croatia that literally joined about 4 or 5 packs before he stayed in one pack. So they're actually a lot more social than we think. That doesn't mean that there isn't conflict between territories. If there's, this is our food, this is the area we get our food, we need to protect this. But yeah, they're a lot more social than we used to think.
Brilliant. That's wonderful to have that understanding. So that's what it looks like in the wild. And then we have these socialized wolves. When I was reading, I was thinking about those first pioneering wolves who decided to forge a relationship with human beings. And I was thinking perhaps it was more like the socialized wolves that you knew. And I was also very interested in the fact that it's not the leading wolves who will go and investigate something scary, that they send the send somebody else off
Yeah.
to them. I was very surprised because I thought, okay, surely they're going to be more fearless, and therefore they will be the ones to lead in that respect. But no, they send off the
Yeah.
other. And I just, I had these visions of these wolves all those centuries ago, um, looking at human beings and sending off the more timid ones to go and investigate, and wondering whether then we actually forged a relationship with the more timid ones, or did the lead ones go, oh, okay, they're onto a good thing, we'd better muscle in here. What's what's your interpretation?
So mum and dad, or the breeding pair, are the future of the pack, right? So they're not going to put themselves in danger, because otherwise the whole family unit will disintegrate. And is timid the right word? I would say curious. The younger wolves, who are a little dispensable because they aren't going to be the future of the pack necessarily, they'll kind of go, right, you just go and check that situation out, and we'll just see if it's okay. Which is where it makes me laugh when people go, oh, if you're the alpha, you have to go through the door first. I'm like, really? Actually, yeah, you're not. No. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It was always like the young adolescents who would be like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to go and investigate that first. And then, if the others saw it, would say, oh yeah, maybe we'll go then. So yeah, it's one of those, again, those myths that you just want to dispel, that people kind of go, this is how it is. No, it's not. It's not at all. It's completely opposite.
And it makes complete sense, because when are we at our most curious? And when are we at our most impulsive? It
Yep.
is teenage years. And and why is it that it's young men who are sent off to war? Um, Unfortunately, it's still the case, but it is because certain people in power are taking advantage of that extra testosterone and the curiosity and the aggression at that particular time in their lives. So it does make complete sense that this is the way that they would be operating.
Interestingly, all of our wolves that I raised, when they get to about 9 months of age, go through a fear period. Now, that's the time when they're starting to explore more away from the pack. So therefore, if you are more fearful, more cautious, you're more likely to survive. That's my theory of it.
No, I think you're right, because fear can keep you safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so many wolves don't actually reach adulthood. They're killed by their own prey, by us. There's so many things out there that are gonna injure you or kill you. So yeah,
Yeah.
to be fearful at that age is, I think, really important. But we see our dogs go through these fear periods too.
We do. Actually, funnily enough, when I was thinking about Teddy, it would have been around 8, 9 months that I started to see him become more wary of bigger dogs. And yes, it was around that time.
Yeah.
I thought it also coincided with having like hormonal bursts, where testosterone started to coming in more strongly. But yes, now I'm seeing it a little bit differently.
Well, there's so many factors, isn't there? There's puberty, adolescence, there's fear periods, there's just so much going on. It's really tough for a dog to be an adolescent.
Yes, it is. Adolescence, I think, across all species is a bit
Oh,
challenging.
absolutely. Yeah. They don't make the right decisions. We think about teenage boys, or that's the same. Well, I'm not saying it's just exclusively boys. Girls can be just as silly, but yeah,
Yeah,
so many similarities. And the brain structure is exactly the same. So why wouldn't it be so similar?
absolutely. Mammals are mammals. We're going to have things in common.
Yeah.
So what then? We've got this picture of wolves in the wild, wolves who have been socialized because they're in captivity.
And not all wolves in captivity are socialized, which is why when you go to a zoo, you'll find that quite a lot of stress behaviors, or you don't see the wolves.
Yeah.
Very unlike wolves to run up to a fence to say hello to people. That's only because they've been reared from a really early age. And that also then, years later now, you think about the ethics of that. I mean, all the wolves I raised were actually rejected by their parents. They were in risk of dying, so were pulled out of the enclosures. So therefore, I felt justified that I could raise those wolves. It doesn't always happen that way in captivity. For people who want to have socialized wolves, they'll take them from viable parents and hand rear them themselves, which I don't agree with.
No, essentially, this is a form of kidnapping, and it's not something that we should be engaged in. So that's really very, very true. So coming back now to, there's, before we just start talking about dogs, there is a behavior that you described which I found utterly charming, and it is the muzzle holding.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So wolves hold each other's muzzles a lot. And if you think about our dogs, they like to come and like up to our faces and hold our faces as well, or lick our faces. So if you are a wolf who wants to be appeasing to another wolf, you would come underneath and you would hold their muzzle from underneath. If you wanted to be more of a, I'm telling you off and I want to kind of keep you down and you're overstepping the mark, then a wolf will come and hold over the top. So for me, raising the cubs, sometimes if they were being a little bit too rambunctious and being a bit silly and getting a little bit high, I could just put my hand over their muzzle, like, calm down. That's enough, So very small gestures. And I learned from the wolves, it just takes a look, a stare, a very minor vocalization, a very minor postural change to say, enough's enough, sort yourself out, calm down. And again, that's something else you can take back to the dog world, because the dogs do exactly the same. You see a really confident dog and there's a really silly youngster who's getting a bit over the top. They'll just stand still, they'll look away. If that doesn't work, they might do a little bit of a lip lift, a little bit of a growl, a little bit of a stare. If that doesn't work, it's like, well, I'm going to tell you, just going to hold on to you for a second. It's none of this rolling and pinning and, I never saw an adult wolf roll a cub and pin them down. I saw cubs rolling over in front of adults to say, oh yeah, look, I'm really submissive to you. No, I'm not being naughty. And the adult might stand over them and do a bit of vocalization, but I never ever saw an adult wolf pin a cub down.
I want to come back to the word submissive, because again, that takes us into this hierarchical model. And I'm wondering, is there more than submission going on here, or is it just a young wolf wanting to get attention and from an adult that they want to impress?
Well, funny enough, there is a form of submission called obnoxious submission, which Dakota was the queen of, where you just keep doing these submissive behaviors like muzzle holding and crawling up and, being all silly. And it would get to the point where her sister would go, oh, just stop it. It's just like, you've done it enough. And she'd do it to humans as well, just so we often talk in the dog world of being passive submissive or active submission, but we don't often talk about obnoxious submission. And I see dogs do that as well, where they're just like over the top with it, a bit silly. They're just sort of pushing their luck a bit, really.
Yeah. It is. I have seen it. And, Teddy is very cool. He's a cool dog, unless he's worried about something. But he's a very cool dog on the whole. And other dogs, girls really like to flirt with him. I would say they come over, and he's got a few female friends, and they really do this little dance around him, and they will, roll over in front of him, and they're desperate for his attention, and he just goes, no thanks. No thanks. But on the other hand, it's a male who's approaching and trying to get his attention, and it's a younger male, he will, if he doesn't, he likes to play as long as he doesn't have to play holding back his energy. You know, he used to do that a lot, but now he's older. He's just, it has to be worth his while. It has to be, he considers to be fun. But what he does do with the younger ones who are, you know, desperately trying to get him to play is he'll pretend he chases them. So off they go running and then he just comes back. Or if they're really annoying him, he'll just do this look away. And if they persist, he'll do the growl, as you
Yeah.
exactly described. It's like, get off now. I've had
Yeah.
enough. Not in the mood. Go away. So you can see this. So I think then the next question I had for you is, what do you feel are the differences between wolves and dogs? Because there are so many similarities, even with the muzzle holding. I recognize, because not because Teddy does that, but because he and his friends, you know, the licking, they really, I thought this must be a social interaction that's like a derivation or a variation on that. So what are the differences?
So like you say, there are so many similarities, but I always used to describe the wolves as being your dog plus like 10 or plus 100. Everything is bigger, in your face. You have less time to sort everything out. You know, they are very much their own creatures. They won't want to interact with you. They don't. If you don't do the right thing around them, they're quite happy to tell you, you know, but that's not how you do things in the wolf world. They grow up quicker. So, you know, you think about our dogs, we have bred them to stay very puppy-like, very appealing, very kind of like, you know, immature, because that's what we like. We like to think of them as our babies and stuff. Whereas wolves hit a certain point and they just speed away. So I would say up to 6 weeks, they're pretty similar in their growth and their behavior and everything. After that, they're off. I remember, you know, one day sitting in the enclosure and having Torak sat in my lap eating an apple. And it was almost like the next day he was like, don't need you anymore. I'm quite independent, thanks very much. You know, I saw them hunting and catching like mice at like just over 12 weeks of age. By 5 months, they were hunting things in their enclosure, like pheasants that would land. And I remember one day they drove a pheasant towards me. And I, of course, let the pheasant go past. And they stopped in front of me and gave me the most dirtiest look, as if it's like, what are you doing? Why did you not catch that? We've set up this amazing hunt for you to grab the pheasant, and you just let it go. And they kind of like gave me this dirty look and then just turned away and like walked away like teenagers. It was just hilarious. But going back to your original question,
I'm still laughing about that.
I know, it was just like one of those moments of, oh, I didn't get that right, did I?
You know, the withering looks that teenagers can give, and you know, tell you that you're useless. I'm sure many parents could recognize that.
It was very, very funny. But yeah, everything's just like bigger. You know, they are so much more independent. They are so much stronger. They are so much more aloof when they get older. When they reach maturity, especially the males, then they'll get less likely to allow people into their inner circle. We used to talk about people being taken off the Christmas card list because they get to a certain age and they go, I don't like you. And that person would never be able to get into that inner circle again. So you didn't have to do much wrong. Sometimes you couldn't even work out what someone had done wrong for a wolf to go, don't like you, don't come near me, I'm not interacting with you anymore. You know, there'd be times when, you know, the wolves would do something to somebody, like they'd start being a bit silly. Like we might have a film crew in and the wolf might be trying to grab some of the equipment. And one of the handlers might try and stop that wolf from doing that. And the wolf would go, get off, you know, that I'm going to do it. And I could literally go over and go, stop it. And they go, oh, sorry, mum. And they'd walk off. So, you know, they were very much, they pick who they respected and who they didn't as well. And you couldn't change that.
Well, you know, listening to you, I find that it's explaining some issues that we have with dogs. And I can only speak from the male dog perspective because that's who I live with. But I did notice that the list of things that Teddy would accept and the people or the dogs that he would accept got shorter as he matured.
Yep.
And I've always said he became much more selective after one, and even more so after two, and even more so after three. And now I'm listening to, I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is normal. And what's wrong is that we're expecting them to be puppy social all their lives.
And they're not. Do we have as wide a friend set as we had as a kid? No way. You know, we go to school, we've got hundreds of friends. We go to college, we have friends. You know, we go to work, we have less friends. You know, as our life goes on, we have a smaller set of trusted people that we will spend time with and trust with our deepest secrets. It's very rare that we have someone who's still friends with thousands of people, and we look like we are because our Facebook thing, we've got however many people, but do we know those people? Do we interact? No, it's a forced concept, isn't it? The social platforms are force, and we know those people could turn on us on a dime if we said something wrong. But I've got a really, really, really small set of trusted friends that I know will step up at any point if I need them. You know, friends and family to me, you know, are the people who stick with you through thick and thin. And it's the same with the wolves, really. It's the same with the dogs. You know, they do get more selective, and they can be unforgiving. But usually there's a blinking good reason why they're unforgiving for not liking or not accepting a person.
And I'm absolutely certain that Teddy has excellent reasons for being so selective. I'm not privy to that because I'm not a dog. And that's, you know, that's a fact of life. I don't have his nose and I can't sniff what he sniffs. I can't get into his head. And even if I got into his head, I might not always agree with his interpretation of something, but he's entitled to his interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's so valuable. I cannot recommend this book enough. Among the Wolves, it is magical, but at the same time, you'll look at your dog and you'll understand so much more. Toni, thank you so much for the book and for your time today.
You're welcome. It's been lovely speaking to you again.
And now, if people want to find you, I'm going to be putting a link to the book in the description box. And if they want to find you, how do they do that?
It's really easy. You know, I've got a website, which is just tonishelbourne.co.uk. It's got a list of all my books on there, as well as all my behaviour work and my T-Touch stuff and all the other things that I do as well. But you can find a link directly from the book from there as well.
And I will also be putting a link to the last interview that you did with me about fireworks. And so hopefully we will see you again at some point because you have so much to share. Thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.